Larry Elder is a lawyer, a writer, and a radio host. On January 15, 2016, he sat down with Dave Rubin on the Rubin Report. At some point during this conversation, the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, was mentioned, and it wasn't long after that that a disagreement became apparent.
So James Clapper, who you just mentioned, he's the same guy, the same CIA director who sat in front of Congress and said that we're not spying on Americans. Remember, and he was scratching the top of his head because, as they say in Seinfeld, when you're lying, you touch, the higher up you touch on your face, the bigger the lie is.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
And he says, we're not wittingly spying on the American public. We now know that that wasn't the case,
what he said was,
right?
I gave the least untruthful answer I could give. But later on, he admitted it. And so, to me, as far as I'm concerned, he's a legitimately honest guy.
So, well, I guess he gave the least honest answer he could
Least
give.
untruthful answer.
Least untruthful.
Right.
But it wasn't, I guess, but it wasn't truthful.
Mr. Elder is correct as far as the way in which Clapper worded his defense.
I responded in what I thought was the most truthful or least untruthful manner by saying no.
And it's worthwhile to point out the irony of a defense like this. Not only was Clapper's testimony before a congressional committee dishonest, his defense was dishonest as well. Just for the record, no is one word. If Clapper had spent a few minutes answering this question, maybe there'd be enough nuance and gray area for this to be a worthy defense. But when you answer a question with a single black and white word, there's not a whole lot of ambiguity available for you to wiggle your way out of the hot seat with. If being dishonest and then being dishonest about being dishonest is Mr. Elder's idea of being honest, he's being rather dishonest himself. Honestly. And as it turns out, this is not the only example of Elder's lack of honesty. During this discussion, Mr. Elder argued in favor of the Iraq War, and one of the things he cited to support this argument was public opinion. The fact that invading Iraq was, at one time, popular.
At one time, 73% of the American people supported this war. After 9/11, 90% of the American people thought we were going to get hit again. After 9/11, 90% of the American people believed that we were going to get hit again.
However, Mr. Elder also argued that withdrawing from Iraq was a bad decision, and he didn't cite public opinion that time because he couldn't. Just as invading Iraq was once popular, withdrawing from Iraq was popular as well, as Mr. Rubin pointed out.
Most of the Americans very clearly didn't want to be there anymore.
And when you take into consideration the simple fact that being popular isn't a good enough reason to support anything in the first place, citing public opinion polls only when you agree with them is not a very honest thing to do.
It's hypocritical.
Perhaps.
It's not a major offense, it's just something worth keeping an eye out for. If you're ever under the impression that someone's making a solid argument, but you're not exactly sure why, maybe they're not giving you all of the information.
He was scratching the top of his head because, as they say in Seinfeld, when you're lying, you touch, the higher up you touch on your face, the bigger the lie is. And he says, we're not wittingly spying on the American public. We now know that that wasn't the case.
What he said was, and so, to me, as far as I'm concerned, he's a legitimately honest guy.